The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
At 5 minutes after the hour, ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the Dr. Sky Experience as we take you on a magical journey from the Earth to the stars and deep out into the universe. We appreciate you, ladies and gentlemen, and always the contact number here is 1-800-848-9222 to get in touch with us and the great guests that we have as you tell us from the many emails that I do receive. If you'd like to send me an email about the radio show and even proposing some potential guests, no guarantee that we'll get every one of them on, my email is simply drsky@wabcradio.com. And don't forget, you can also listen not only to this particular host, Steve Cates, Dr. Sky, many of the previous broadcasts of the Dr. Sky Experience by going to wabcradio.com and also the very popular RedAppleAudioNetworks.com. But what would this show, ladies and gentlemen, be without our helmsman? And we say thank you to Tony and Bill navigating the powerful signal of Talk Radio 77 WABC across the nation, around the world, and I'm confident, always out into the deep parts of the universe. Always great topics from astronomy, space, aviation, weather, celebrity guests, and stories of American exceptionalism. And we, of course, of the 4 types of conversation, we really appreciate dialogue in what we call the mannerisms of critical thinking. Ladies and gentlemen, let me take you on a magical journey right now. Radio is the theater of the mind, and let's now take our magical starship and head out to the red god of war, the planet Mars. Right now, Mars some 220 million miles away from the Earth, taking many, many minutes, even if you could travel at the speed of light, which is 670 million miles an hour. But something is very interesting that's happening. You might have heard or read in the news, right or wrong, the information may be correct, who knows. Comet 3I Atlas, moving exceptionally close to the planet Mars as we talk in astronomy, 18 million miles away from the planet Mars, is close in astronomical standards. Why is this important? Because many spacecraft that are actually orbiting the red god of war, Mars, are going to pay particular attention to this particular spacecraft. Some believe, right or wrong, that it's a Bracewell probe. What is that? An alien spacecraft from another star system. I tend to believe it's a comet, but we'll hear from you and your opinions throughout the entire show. Also, we celebrate the 68th anniversary, and seemingly it just seems like yesterday, October the 4th, 1957, the dawn of the space age. Incredible, as we mentioned before, some 68 years ago. And think of it in this context. When Wilbur and Orville Wright took their first flight on their very primitive aircraft back in 1903, 68 years later, it was 1971, and we were landing on the surface of the moon. Let us talk a little bit more about the red god of war, the planet Mars, as we introduce in just a moment our very special guest, David Barron. His brand new book called The Martians, the true story of an alien craze that captured the turn of the century America, a fascinating story. But the backstory on Mars as we move in our magical starship, Mars, the 4th planet from the sun in the solar system, has stirred the curiosity, wonder, and awe of man through all history. In antiquity, the red planet, a brilliant, fiery wonder in the heavens near its periodic oppositions, was propitiated by vaguely known peoples as the fearsome god of war. Its brighter apparitions were taken as portents of cataclysmic events, bringing death and devastation in their wake. Although no longer to be a god to most men, Mars, in its anthropomorphic Greco-Roman deification, is known even today to millions of the world's people as the graphic symbol of war. The ancient Egyptians referred to Mars as Herdesher, the Red One. But what about beings on this particular planet and the story of life in the universe? It goes back, interestingly enough, some 87 years ago, right in the New York City area, a broadcast that many of you have heard about, but maybe never heard the opening parts of the show. Orson Welles opened up with his H.G. Wells novel, War of the Worlds, and he told the audience like this, what was to be expected about an invasion from the planet Mars, taking the high ground from H.G. Wells' novel, War of the Worlds. And here's how it sounded in clip 1.
In the 39th year of the 20th century came the Great Disillusionment. It was near the end of October. Business was better. The war scare was over. More men were back at work. Sales were picking up. On this particular evening, October 30th, the Crosley service estimated that 32 million people were listening in on radios. next 24 hours, not much change in temperature. A slight atmospheric disturbance of undetermined origin is reported over Nova Scotia, causing a low-pressure area to move down rather rapidly over the northeastern states, bringing a forecast of rain accompanied by winds of light gale force. Maximum temperature 66, minimum 48. This weather report comes to you from the Government Weather Bureau. We take you now to the Meridian Room in the Hotel Park Plaza in downtown New York, where you will be entertained by the music of Raymond Raquello and his orchestra.
And this is basically what it sounded like, ladies and gentlemen, as Orson Welles gave us a different twist on a great story that the great science fiction writer and novelist H.G. Wells wrote, called War of the Worlds. But most important to us, ladies and gentlemen, is the story about what happened many, many years ago here in the United States of America and around the world. Let's go back in our time machine to the New York Times, date December 9, 1906. The headline, and it was no joke, there is life on the planet Mars. Our very special guest, David Barron, is an award-winning journalist, broadcaster, and author of The Beast in the Garden and The American Eclipse. A former science correspondent for NPR, he's also written for the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Los Angeles Times, Scientific American, and other publications. David recently served as the Baruch S. Blumberg NASA Library of Congress Chair in astrobiology, exploration, and scientific innovation. He joins us on the Dr. Sky Experience. Good morning, David. Long time in coming, and I thank you for joining us. How are you this morning?
So nice to talk to you. I'm doing fine. It was wonderful to hear that bit of Orson Welles. There was no one like him, and that broadcast, you could just play the whole thing. It was
absolutely.
If anyone hasn't heard it, they should hear the whole thing.
Well, absolutely. In just a few moments, we'll go to clip number 2 to give our listening audience a little better flavor of exactly what happened then, because it's so fascinating. The home base of this powerful radio station, Talk Radio 77, obviously the proud area in the metropolitan area, New York City, and the states around it. Back on that date, as you know, October 30th, 1938, that must have been a shock, right, David, about how people interpreted that. Tell us a little bit more about it before we hear more of what Orson Welles and War of the Worlds on the radio was like.
Right. Well, of course, so the War of the Worlds, as you said, it was a novel written in 1897 by H.G. Wells, the British novelist, but and it tells the story of Martians invading the Earth, coming to Earth and marching across the landscape in these giant tripod machines as they were looking to take over our planet. The original was set in London, but when Orson Welles put it on the radio in 1938, he brought the story to the New York City area and presented it as if it were a news broadcast. And so that's why there were a lot of people who thought it was real, who thought that the Martians were coming. And in the course of writing my book, I tracked down a trove of letters, angry letters from listeners that were written to Orson Welles afterwards because they had been hoodwinked. And it's really interesting to see what they said, because a number of them noted, well, haven't scientists found that there are canals on Mars?
Yes.
And that there's a civilization there? And that was the idea I write about in my book that happened in the 1890s and the very beginning of the 1900s, when astronomers really did think there were canals on Mars.
That's incredible. And the New York Times, of course, its prestigious paper, all the course of history, for that headline that's written inside the jacket of your book here. And again, ladies and gentlemen, we're speaking with David Barron, the author of this brand new book, The Martians, subtitled The True Story of an Alien Craze That Captured Turn-of-the-Century America. And if we put it, David, into modern perspective, the beat still goes on, right, very strongly for people like Elon Musk and other different, space agencies, NASA, privatized space. The goal is what? To go to Mars. So this topic is very much in everybody's mind. And also the possibility of life. We're still searching, correct?
Absolutely. In fact, just a few weeks ago, NASA held a press conference. It kind of got lost in the swirl of terrible news of the last few weeks. But NASA held a press conference announcing the strongest evidence yet for past life on Mars. The Perseverance rover that's been up there for a few years looking for interesting rocks found one that had some interesting staining on it that it turns out the minerals are ones that were probably, if they were found on Earth, we would say they were deposited by microbes. And it's possible that there were microbes on Mars that deposited those minerals.
What an amazing planet. And I want to share this with the audience, David. Your great research, as a writer and an author, goes very deep here. And we share some commonality in this. For many, many years, I still consider an expert observer, if you want to call that, as the people say. I mean, the term expert is maybe exaggerated by some. But looking at the planet Mars for over 40 years through the telescope, I'm certainly not Percival Lowell, who we'll talk about, but I do have a lot of experience behind the telescope in observing the surface of the planet, and it's quite fascinating. We want to encourage people out there, with the sound of this powerful radio station, that when Mars makes another one of these close apparitions, that I'm sure people out there, young students, people of all ages, to go, to get involved and take a look at this object, because what we're about to hear from you is just amazing about the story of how this whole alien craze captured the turn of a century in America here. It's amazing. So if we can, David, let's see if we can hear clip number 2 to get a little deeper into what Orson Welles was talking about, and we'll hear now a little bit of War of the Worlds.
Ladies and gentlemen, here is the latest bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. Toronto, Canada. Professor Morse of Macmillan University reports observing a total of 3 explosions on the planet Mars between the hours of 7:45 p.m. and 9:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This confirms earlier reports received from American observatories. Now, nearer home, comes a special bulletin from Trenton, New Jersey. It is reported that at 8:50 p.m., a huge flaming object, believed to be a meteorite, fell on a farm in the neighborhood of Grover's Mill, New Jersey, 22 miles from Trenton. The flash in the sky was visible within a radius of several hundred miles, and the noise of the impact was heard as far north as Elizabeth. We have dispatched a special mobile unit to the scene, and we'll have our commentator, Carl Phillips, give you a word picture of the scene as soon as he can reach there from Princeton. In the meantime, we take you to the Hotel Martinet in Brooklyn, where Bobby Millett and his orchestra are offering a program of dance music.
That is totally incredible, David. I mean, I can only imagine when people turned on the radio. But again, the disclaimer was also at the beginning of the radio show. Am I correct in that assessment?
Yes, but many people didn't hear it. And poor Carl Phillips, the newsman who's sent out to investigate, as I recall, he ends up incinerated on live radio. So you can imagine if you missed the beginning of the broadcast saying that this was a radio play, and you think that you're hearing a newsman out there in Grover's Mills, New Jersey, who suddenly is hit by a heat ray from aliens, you'd be pretty scared yourself.
Well, David, take us back in the movie side of this whole thing. And again, you know better than I do. The movie that was War of the Worlds, the first iteration, was that around 1953 or so? And that shows all these flying, Martian machines. It was actually done very well for the time. I guess am I right? Around 1953 was that first iteration.
I don't remember the date, but I certainly remember the movie when I was a kid. But yeah, I mean, I think what people will remember who have seen that, or then there was the remake with Tom Cruise.
Yes.
That the Martians move around in these giant tripods, and people tend to think that those are the Martians, but those were not the Martians. Those were the Martians' machines. The Martians inside those machines were these hideous monsters that looked sort of like a cross between an octopus and a jellyfish. They basically were just a giant brain with these little tentacles that could control their machines. And that was, again, this was dreamed up originally by H.G. Wells in the 1890s based on the science of the time, because astronomers in the 1890s were saying there was evidence of intelligent life on Mars, and H.G. Wells had to imagine what those Martians might be like.
Yes.
And actually, the idea was that the Martians are more advanced evolutionarily than we are. And so what H.G. Wells did was he thought, well, what will happen to humans millions of years in the future? As we depend more and more on technology, we're just going to become brains, because that's all that's important, with just tiny little tentacles for hands to control our machines, because we won't need to actually use our muscles anymore. So the Martians in the War of the Worlds were actually humans projected deep into the future.
That's incredible. Our special guest, David Perrin, the Martians. This is his book, The True Story of an Alien Craze That Captured Turn-of-the-Century America. Your participation, ladies and gentlemen, 1-800-848-9222, always 1-800-848-9222. Questions about this subject as we delve deeper into it to give you good reason to call. Or the correlation as we talk now about a comet many think could be, some say in the news, I don't necessarily believe it, that this is a Bracewell probe. What's that? An alien artifact from another spacecraft civilization, maybe another star system, that may have some sort of intelligent life behind it, or simply an interstellar comet coming close to the red god of war, Mars, some 18 million miles away, and in space, that's close many spacecraft are going to be observing it. On a lighter note, when you just mentioned before about the Tom Cruise movie, War of the Worlds, those tripods that you see running around, allegedly, I guess it's somewhere in the New York City area, that's incredible because in a radio broadcast career previous to this, we used to play that ending of the tripod sounds at the end of the show, and some people took the liberty, David, of playing it extremely loud at 3 o'clock in the morning, causing a lot of problems for individuals, dogs, pets, and other people who tried to sleep. But it wasn't me behind it. There you
go. I would imagine.
David, let's get into your book. This is fascinating because many people may not recognize the significance of this whole story. But take us back, and without, giving every, one of the bits and tenets of the book away, we want people to get the copy of the book themselves, read it, make up their own minds about the story that you're projecting here, and its great historical value. Start off in the beginning, this whole Martian craze. Let's go back to how you say your research tells us when and how this happened.
Right. Well, so just to say first about how I got into this, so I was a kid in the 1960s, sure. And I grew up with Martians. I mean, back then I would see Marvin the Martian in Looney Tunes cartoons, and right. There was a popular sitcom back then called My Favorite Martian. There were Martians, of course, in sci-fi novels and in comic books. And I, since have grew up to be a science writer. I write books about science, but for a general public. And I came to wonder, well, where did that all come from? Why does it loom so large in the public's consciousness? Why do we talk about Martians and not, Venusians or Saturnians or anything else? It's always Martians.
Exactly.
Well, so I started to do the historical research, and that's when I came across these things like that New York Times article in 1906, in all seriousness, talking about the Martian civilization. So how did that start? Well, it actually began in 1877 in Italy with an astronomer in Milan who decided he was going to make a new map of Mars. And Mars, I mean, you observe it through your telescope. You can see it from the Earth's surface. But it's not so easy to make out the surface of Mars. You are looking through the Earth's atmosphere, and that causes all sorts of distortion. So even if you have a really big telescope, it's hard to get a clear view of the fine detail on the surface. But this astronomer in Milan, Giovanni Schiaparelli, night after night studied Mars when it made a very close approach to Earth. And the map he drew showed not only dark areas and light areas that people thought were oceans and continents, but he also showed a network of these very fine straight lines that he imagined were waterways of some sort. And he called them in Italian canali, which means channels, like the English channel.
Right.
Well, it was translated or mistranslated into English as canals, which suggests they were built by somebody. Now, at the time, people knew it was a mistranslation, and they sort of joked about these canal-building Martians, but these lines were a mystery. And in 1894, a new astronomer came on the scene. It was an American, Percival Lowell, who decided he was going to get to the bottom of this mystery. And he came up with a very interesting theory that, in fact, these lines were canals, not for shipping, but for irrigation. And that the Martians were living on a planet that was running out of water, and the only way the civilization could survive was by building this global irrigation network to bring water from the polar ice caps down to their farms and cities. And
makes sense, right?
Idea that just
makes a lot of sense,
eventually.
Right? Yeah, that's amazing. I would think the same thing. But going on to this, not to split hairs on the dynamics of observing. Many people may not know this, and you brought it to our attention. You can have a massive telescope, and you can have what looks like clear skies, but when you look at the image of a planet, it can seem like it's boiling sometimes in the in the image that you're seeing, and thus obviously the difficulty of seeing the surface details because we have this atmosphere. And I heard something interesting, David, a long time ago. I forget what astronomer said this, folks. It's interesting. If you took an apple in your hand and you looked at the thinness of the skin of the apple, that's exactly the precious atmosphere that we breathe, that thinness, but it can cause all kinds of distortion, right? So obviously these observers, they had somewhat good seeing, somewhat bad seeing, but these are the pioneers. So please continue. This is fascinating.
Right. So, but again, I mean, we take for granted that we know what Mars is like because we've all seen the pictures sent back by Curiosity and Perseverance, these rovers up there. We know what Mars looks like, but project yourself back to the 19th century where all you know is this fuzzy, orangey object in your telescope. And so, the first reports of these canals was from Italy, and then Percival Lowell comes along in 1894. He was an extremely wealthy, aristocratic Bostonian. The Lowells of Massachusetts made their fortune in textiles in the early 19th century.
Yes.
The city of Lowell, Massachusetts, is named for them. So Percival Lowell graduated from Harvard, as all of the Lowell men did. He graduated in 1876, and he was a famous writer for quite a while. He traveled the world. But in 1894, as he was approaching the age of 40, he decided he was going to dedicate his time and his money to studying Mars. And so he founded an observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona. It's still there, the Lowell Observatory. Anyone who goes to the Grand Canyon, who goes through Flagstaff, should stop there. It's a really interesting place.
You bet.
And he bought a state-of-the-art large telescope, and he specifically put his telescope in Flagstaff because the skies tend to be clear there, and he thought the atmosphere would be pretty stable. So he studied Mars more assiduously than just about anyone and created new maps that showed more and more of these straight so-called canals on Mars. And he was such an aristocratic, persuasive, articulate person that he was out there giving talks and writing for magazines, and really got the public on board. And it took a whole new turn in 1899 when the inventor Nikola Tesla, a famous New Yorker,
yes,
went to Colorado to study the what at the time was called wireless. We now know it as radio, but it was the very beginnings of radio, and he thought he picked up radio signals from Mars. And so when Tesla announced that to the world, then it just completely took off, and the whole world sort of went Mars crazy.
That's amazing. And we'll get into the story of Nikola Tesla, of course, and his connection to New York City and other places in Colorado, the state that you're broadcasting right now with us from here on Talk Radio 77, WABC. Ladies and gentlemen, your questions, comments on the whole subject of Martian life, or life as it might exist, as we're talking with David Barron. His book, The Martians, The True Story of an Alien Craze That Captured Turn-of-the-Century America. Great historical information here. A must-read, ladies and gentlemen, not only if you're a science person in the pursuit of science, but also about American history and also world history when it comes to the observations of the so-called Red God of War, the planet Mars. A fascinating story. And I salute you for this, because there are many things in here. Going regularly to the Lowell Observatory, I share this with you off-air, and I share it now with the audience. During my school days, Dr. Tombaugh, the discoverer of the then planet Pluto, was, of course, the discoverer back in February of 1930 at that same great observatory. And I recommend people, if you're going out there, I get no compensation for that. I'm not asking for that at all. But if you're out, right, David, into the mountains of northern Arizona, where even though it's 100-some degrees down here all the time, it seems forever, and then plus, way up there, it's beautiful in all times of the year, even in winter. That's a great place for an observatory, and we do really appreciate you. 1-800, ladies and gentlemen, 848-9222, to take us as we continue to move through time and space. Our very special guest, David Barron. And I promise, David, to every one of our programs here, as we move into through time and space, we always provide a sky update for the listeners throughout the 2-hour show, so naturally they can take advantage of some of the amazing sights that are in our skies. So when we come back, let's talk a little bit more about Percival Lowell. I find that man fascinating, and some of the things he, till his dying day, believed that there were Martians like us. Maybe they didn't look like us, but wasn't that the general consensus, David? Wasn't
Absolutely. No, Lowell never backed down. To the moment he died in 1916, he believed, in fact, that there was a more advanced civilization on Mars than the civilization on Earth, that the Martians were a civilization that we should aspire to become.
More with David Barron, and we're honored to have him. The book, The Martians, The True Story of an Alien Craze That Captured Turn-of-the-Century America, here on the Dr. Sky Experience, where, ladies and gentlemen, on the powerhouse radio station, Talk Radio 77, WABC. 1-800-848-9222. We see the phone calls coming in, and there's plenty of time to get in touch with our special guest, David Barron. We'll be right back.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
I would enjoy flying to Mars. This was the dream of the first cosmonauts. I wish I could realize it. I'm ready to fly without coming back. A quote from the first female in space, Soviet cosmonaut Valentina Tereshkova. 32 minutes after the hour, ladies and gentlemen, our special guest, and we call him a friend, David Barron, author of The Martians, the true story of an alien craze that captured turn-of-the-century America. David, you're popular, and let's go to the callers right now.
Okay.
Let's say good morning to Frank in Maine. Frank, good morning. How are you up there in Maine? And you're on with David Barron. How you doing?
Good morning, Dr. Sky. It's very cold up here, and it's very beautiful. I like the discussion tonight about Mars, and my question is relative to the lines that was talked about by Lowell on Mars. Now, I read somewhere that he was also, and maybe I'm wrong about this, he was also amazed with the Nazca lines, the lines in Peru.
Oh.
And later on, it wasn't Lowell, but it was somebody else who was looking at the lines of the pyramids in Giza and how they aligned on Earth. And since Earth and Mars are kind of like sister planets, do you think that those lines and the lines on Earth, and this is specifically David, do you think the lines on Earth and the lines there could be matched up where it's some type of cosmic connection and
Wow.
And life can be in that cosmic connection?
Pretty good points, Frank. David, wow, we get some really good callers here, don't we?
Interesting questions. I know that there have been some serious astronomers who, back at around Lowell's time, who were studying the pyramids and how they may be lined up in some way with the stars. Lowell himself, I never read anything that he wrote about that. And I don't know that he studied the Nazca lines. But the thing about the lines on Mars is, and I don't want to give too much away here,
Sure.
but, the lines that Lowell saw, they weren't there. I mean, they were basically optical illusions. I mean, this whole thing was built on the fact that observing Mars through an earthbound telescope is a really hard thing to do, and you have to be careful about the eye playing tricks. So the lines on Mars, there are interesting things on Mars, absolutely, but the lines that Lowell saw and mapped, and some of the others, we've now gone to Mars. There are no lines where he drew them.
No.
It was all it was his eye and his mind that saw them.
Amazing, Frank.
Okay.
I mean, you bring up good points. You get the last word as we tell our callers. Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Sky. I'm also fascinated, and this is just something to ponder. I'm also fascinated with the fact that I have an article, and I should send it to you, Dr. Sky, one day, from 1975 that says that there is life and lines on on Io or Europa, I believe.
Europa, yes.
Europa, and there was lines on Europa, which meant that at that era, and I believe it was either Nixon or Ford. I don't know. I think Nixon resigned and Ford became president.
Sure.
That we were going to explore Europa because Europa had lines that were like canals. So it's just something to ponder.
You never know.
With lines.
It's amazing. David, your response to Frank on that? That's an interesting point.
Well,
Who knows Europa?
Actually, NASA has sent a spacecraft toward Europa that's on its way now to look for life, although it has nothing to do with lines on Europa, but there's appears to be an kind of a subsurface ocean there that could have some kind of life in it. I mean, it would probably be microbial life. But yeah, Europa is actually a place where astronomers think there could be life.
Well, Frank, thanks for the call, as always, to the Dr. Sky Experience. Stay warm, the home of the great novelist Stephen King. Appreciate your participation. Let's now continue, ladies and gentlemen, to move on as we take us out to the journey into the universe with the great mysteries that are out there. We welcome Max in New York City. You're on with David Barron. Good morning. How you doing?
Dr. Sky and David, thank you for taking my call. When we landed the rovers on Mars, I think it was 87 or SOL 87, and they found, you can see exactly, there's a manhole cover on one of the the portions there on Mars. There was also a stone that they found when I think Spirit or Opportunity were taking images.
Okay.
And it showed an octagon that was drilled through the stone about, I don't know, it could have got about a foot through. The stone was nothing fantastic about the stone itself, but that it had an octagon drilled straight through without any breakage of lines from one side to the other.
Wow, Max. Talking about opening our minds to the mysteries, David, your comment on that sounds amazing.
Yeah, well, and you may remember in 1976, the Viking orbiter took a picture of what looked like a face on Mars that actually looked a lot like it was some monument from some ancient civilization there, and caused all sorts of speculation. I think it was in 2001 that another orbiter took a picture of the same place, and alas, when the sunlight hit that feature in a different way, it was pretty clear it was not some interesting face, but was just a natural mesa that was lit in a certain way. So we always have to be careful about, we all tend to see patterns, and sometimes they're meaningful and sometimes they're not. I don't remember anything. I don't know about the manhole cover thing or the octagon, but there are all sorts of fascinating things being seen on Mars, and we need to send people there so we can really investigate what they are.
Max, isn't this all fascinating? I mean, everyday life goes on. We're ruled by the sun. But to talk about these explorations, like Columbus Day coming up, his great journeys around the world, navigation that we talk about, Magellan, I think it's so fascinating that you bring these subjects up to us. And I do appreciate you here on the Dr. Sky Experience. Let's continue to move through time and space, opening up people's minds here with their questions and comments. Good morning, Christine in New York City. How are you this morning? You're on with David Barron.
Talking about the play with Orson Welles being put out on the radio, and my aunt and uncle were subject to that back in 1938.
Wow.
They lived in the west end of Long Branch in New Jersey in a huge old Victorian house with gaslight. And what I heard, they were listening to the radio. There was no announcement that it was a play. They believed it was real, and I heard the same thing from my father, because it was such a panic that afterwards they passed a law that they can't do that anymore. They reprimanded them. I don't remember the exact thing, but my uncle went and got his shotgun and went out on the porch to defend my aunt.
Against those nasty Martians, right, Christine? There you
That's
go.
Right, because they were supposedly coming from a place not far from where they lived in New Jersey. So I think they had quite a fright.
Well, Christine, I appreciate this. Before David responds, I was going to give a little clarion call out there to the listeners of this radio show, the Dr. Sky Experience. If there's anybody out in the area where the alleged meteor, the spacecraft, crashed, I want to hear from somebody about this little area called Grover's Mill, New Jersey. But, David, I think that Christine brings up some fascinating stories. Like, she's also, like, living history there she's talking about. That's great.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for that story, Christine. I mean, I don't write a lot about the 1938 broadcast in my book because I'm writing about things from about 40 years before that, what led to people being fooled by the 1938 broadcast. But I did actually interview some people whose family in Newark was scared that night. And one of the kids, who's now in his 90s, I spoke to, he remembered it well. They fled their apartment building, and they had, the reports on the radio were that the Martians were fumigating the streets with this poison black smoke. And so people were stuffing rags under their door jambs to keep the smoke from coming in. I mean, there really was panic. People,
it's amazing.
Again, they were listening to people being killed on the radio, supposedly.
Oh, yeah, the way they dramatized it. I mean, putting that together, I mean, let's go back into it. Christine, that's amazing. Your shotgun story tops the charts here about that story that you brought up. That's amazing.
Just see my uncle.
Yeah, I can imagine. Your last comment to David, if you have one. Are we going to move forward here? We got so many people that want to speak with David, but I appreciate you. And your last comment.
Well, David, it's great to hear you, and I hope you'll be a guest on this program again in the future.
Well, thank you.
That's very sweet of you to say. Thank you for calling in.
Awesome, Christine. And we want to say good morning to everybody around the nation and the world as well. We move into our beautiful weekend here. And here in Arizona, where I'm broadcasting from, we've waited so long, David, for the triple digits to kind of, go away. One snuck in today, but I love it. I don't know about you. I just love the month of October because it brings not only, in my opinion, from my viewpoint, in observation, some of the clearest skies of the year. And I think that's true for a good part of the United States. What would you say?
Absolutely, yeah. And but also, of course, you're in Arizona, I'm in Colorado. We also have our beautiful fall foliage. It's not like New York or New England, but the aspens turn a beautiful lemon yellow, and so there's a lot to like about the fall out here.
Oh, absolutely, and good sky conditions. And as I promised, ladies and gentlemen, we'll get into on our second hour a sky update, because just teasing it, David, and you probably know this very well too, we have a gorgeous harvest moon coming up on the night of the 6th, so stay tuned for more on that on the Dr. Sky Experience as we fill you in on things not only that you can hear about from historical people like David Barron writing The Martians, the true story of an alien craze that captured turn-of-the-century America, but you can actually maybe go out of doors and take advantage of this. And I will never agree with anybody, David, that says, well, I live in a city and I can never see anything. No, you can, believe it or not, and we're not here to bend your arm on it. But, David, this is fascinating to me, the whole story that you're bringing about here. You're talking about, what time period is the book again, so people know that as we move through time? Well,
so the Mars craze that I write about really goes from about 1894 to 1909. It really reached its peak by 1908, 1909. So you mentioned earlier that in 1906, the New York Times had a full-page article, "There is life on the planet Mars." In 1907, the Wall Street Journal, this is no tabloid newspaper, the Wall Street Journal said the biggest news of the year was proof of intelligent life on Mars. That's how mainstream this was. Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone, who was this by then an elder statesman of American science, he said there is no doubt that there is intelligent life on Mars. So this is the extent to which the idea was taken very, very seriously in the late part of that first decade of the 20th century.
More with David Barron, our special guest for the 2 hours on the Dr. Sky Experience. If we hadn't gotten to you, Jeffrey in Queens, Alexi in Queens, and you, ladies and gentlemen, at 1-800-848-9222. Always time, because the callers rule on this particular radio show. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, so much more. If you have an email that you'd like to send me, it's simply drsky@wabcradio.com. And with that, we'll be right back with more with David Barron and The Martian.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
You could warm Mars up over time with greenhouse gases. A quote from Elon Musk at 48 minutes after the hour, and the previous promo that you heard for this radio show, the son of the legendary rock band Cream, Malcolm Bruce's son. They rock on, ladies and gentlemen, and they, too, love listening and wondering about the mysteries of the nighttime sky. The Martians, David Barron, subtitled The True Story of an Alien Craze That Captured the Turn of the Century America. We continue, ladies and gentlemen, with our special guest, and we go to the phones. Let's say good morning to Jeffrey in Queens. You're on with David Barron. How you doing this morning?
Good morning, Doctor. Thank you again for taking my call.
Yes, sir.
I'm very concerned about this rock the size of Manhattan that's traveling at 140,000 miles per hour. And they say it could be maybe an alien, just sending some information or, because it's been traveling. They say this rock is older than the sun.
It is.
So I need to get some more. I need to get some confirmation from you, Doctor. Like, what's going on with this rock up there?
Well, it's interesting. I don't want to cut David short on this, but here's the story from the astronomical side. And there's two sides to this story, obviously, Jeffrey. Some believe that it could be this thing called a Bracewell probe. What's that? A probe from another civilization out in the stars. And I doubt it, because they've been looking at this with telescopes, and apparently it's not going to hit the Earth. The story is, the reason we're talking about it is the coincidence that it's close to Mars right now, and the story of what might be information, right or wrong, people can make up their minds, that we're also talking with David Barron about how people had this craze about Martians, and some of that goes into the historical side of his book. But no, I don't think, Jeffrey, that it's anything to worry about. But let me turn it over to David, who I'm sure has more information on this.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not worried about it striking the Earth. It seems, I mean, astronomers know what its trajectory is, and so I think there's a 0% chance of it hitting the Earth. The question is, what is it? I mean, I would to go with Dr. Sky. I think the simplest explanation is that it's a comet from another solar system, but, you know, we don't know. And that's part of, you know, writing my book about the Martian craze of the turn of the last century. You know, when you don't know something, the imagination can really take over, and that's both good and bad.
You bet.
Well, that's what science is all about. Science is, you know, you have actual, you know, you can have gentlemen like you. We can like take a look at something, but then you have something that's tangible that you have in your hand, right? But then you know, if you drop a rock, it's going to hit the floor and make a sound. So yeah, we have all this stuff. Kind of, I'm trying to just keep it narrow, but yes.
No, you bring up good points. Yeah, Jeffrey, you bring up good points. You know, people read things.
This rock, Doctor, they're saying this rock is older than the sun.
It is, and all cometary objects are probably that. I mean, I'm sure David would agree. You know, I've spent a lot of time observing these objects. I tried to find the comet, just to tell you how humble I am here. This comet, David, you'll get a kick out of this too, and I hope Jeffrey will. It's so faint that even one of the large telescopes that I have, I can't even see the darn thing. But why am I telling you this? Because most of these particular objects, the astronomers know. How do they know that it's not a alien craft? They use a thing called a spectroscope, and it takes these color images of different lines that are chemically coming out of these things. So right now, again, I'm saying this, you know, I haven't observed it, but you have to be careful, and that's why we're tying both of these things in, Jeffrey, that what David's talking about here, about how the alien craze captured America in the turn of the century, and even today, right, David? We keep seeing reports that say, well, many people out there who don't know, let's get the real science on this. And Jeffrey, I think you can sleep well tonight, and I'm not trying to put anything down you're saying. I don't think that's anything to worry about, and I think we'll find out truly that it is another comet from another star system, but nothing more. What say you,
Thank
Jeffrey?
you, Doc, and thank you to the guest. And I wish all our Jewish friends a happy and a healthy Lashana Tova and everyone.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I can't stop watching this thing. It's amazing. It's you know, and when it's going to be gone soon.
You bet. And there's 4 other comets, though. Jeffrey, not to cut you off, there's 4 other objects in the sky. I was up in our mountain house about 4 o'clock this morning trying to find another one of these things, and those skies were super dark. But the point is, there's many, many comets. We're going to keep our eye on this, and I hope you'll keep your radio tuned to 77 WABC. Thanks, Jeffrey. You have a good weekend. Appreciate your time. Let's continue on here. Let's go to Alexi in Queens. Alexi, you're a regular caller to the Dr. Sky Experience. You're on with David Barron. Good morning.
Good evening to both of you. I am... You know, I think it is more fascinating about the man, H.G. Wells. This guy, he was beyond light years, beyond the people of his time in his concepts, in his writings, these ideas of a machine invasion of the earth and such at that period in history and the other stories that he wrote. These are incredible. What was his impetus for doing this? Brilliant man. But what it did is 40 years later, 50 years later, it made a lot of people a lot of money, the idea of Mars. You had this plethora of movies and storybooks and comic books and newspaper articles about Mars. Mars became a household word.
You bet.
What is the deficit here is that 95%. I've gone through tons of papers and literature about Mars and movies. 95% of it is monstrous. 2 eyes, 4 eyes, 3 hands, wishing death on the planet. The only rational 2 movies that were ever made about Mars that have any reality possible was the Robinson Crusoe on Mars and Rocket Ship XM.
Wow. Alexi, you know your stuff. David, here's another interesting caller, don't you think? He brings up some very interesting points.
I'm glad you brought up H.G. Wells. So, and also the fact that the aliens are often monstrous. So I when I started doing research for my book, I assumed that the people during, around the late 19th century, early 20th century would have been afraid of the Martians. They believed that there really were Martians. H.G. Wells writes this book about the Martians invading Earth. But surprisingly, people were not afraid of the Martians back then. In fact, the widespread belief was that the Martians were peaceful, moral beings. They were almost angelic. In fact, sometimes they were depicted with wings like angels.
Wow.
And even H.G. Wells, who in 1897 wrote The War of the Worlds about the Martians invading Earth, he wrote a much lesser-known piece, a magazine article in 1908 called The Things That Live on Mars, where he revisited the Martians, and by then he had been convinced that the Martians were not monsters, but in fact were these beautiful beings, and there are these wonderful depictions in that article. It was in Cosmopolitan magazine, Cosmo.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And the Martians were depicted like basically living in cities, clustered together in family groups. So the idea of Martians as these monsters was not widespread at the time when people thought the Martians were real, which is a real surprise for me.
Well, we need a little bit more of that karma, David, and I'm sure Alexei would agree, not only about people from another world or beings of another world, but maybe in our own spirit about why 8 billion people, seemingly, not all of them, simply can't get along. Alexei, let's talk a little bit about those monsters. And David, this movie that bothered me the most, and it's still in my brain, in the back of my head, and I watched it. It was called Invaders from Mars. Maybe you saw it, Lexi. Maybe you saw it, David. And the reason I say that, the kid in there, I thought that was me because I had the same kind of nightmare after I watched the movie about a flying saucer landing in the back of his house and it goes into the sand. Alexi, did you ever see Invaders from Mars, or David? Any comment on that? That's interesting.
The original one, yes. The second one was pure garbage.
There you go.
Yeah. I think I saw it when I was a kid, but it was a long time ago.
Well, that's interesting. We're rating on the Dr. Sky Experience what we think about certain sci-fi movies. But guys, gentlemen, and everybody listening, that movie, if you haven't seen it, go check. I guess it's available anywhere where movies are seen on the internet. Wherever you get your source of information and streaming. But that one really bothered me because apparently the aliens, they showed what they looked like underground, and they had this head like cut off in a glass bubble. And when you're only like 6 years old, and I think in the New York area, we had Chiller Theater that came on late at night. That one really bothered me. Alexia, you get the last word, and we go to the top of the hour here. Go ahead, please.
I am hoping that someone will make the only serious movie, as a final comment, was the Ray Bradbury story put to screen, The Martian Chronicles. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, that's a good one. See, we should do more sci-fi, analysis here of movies. David, you get the last word, and Alexi, always thank you for being part of our Dr. Sky Experience. Pretty good, huh, David?
I've never seen the movie of The Martian Chronicles, but the book definitely is. I mean, that's one anybody should read. Ray Bradbury, he became a science fiction writer because he read the work of Edgar Rice Burroughs, famous for Tarzan, but he wrote a bunch of Mars books that came directly out of Percival Lowell's canal-building Martian civilization. So the period I write about in the early 20th century led to folks like Ray Bradbury writing about Mars later. Carl Sagan, too. He was inspired by Edgar Rice Burroughs. So a lot of the people we know today, or from the latter part of the 20th century, they got excited about outer space because of fiction that came out of the period I write about in my book.
David Barron, you're great. We're going to continue with him in hour number 2. Alexi, thank you. And we appreciate all of you, ladies and gentlemen. And we continue to move through time and space, 1-800-848-9222, to get in touch with me on the Dr. Sky Experience. Stay tuned for hour number 2 with our special guest, David Barron.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Come on the air at 7 minutes after the hour with the continuance of the Dr. Sky Experience. Appreciate you, ladies and gentlemen, as we move deeper into your weekend. No matter where you're calling or listening to us, we like to say, Talk Radio 77 WABC, with this most powerful signal, we like to say heard. in some 173 countries, all 50 states, and beaming ourselves out across the nation and the world. And I'm even sure, as we get our special guest David Barron back in a moment, way out into the cosmos, if there are indeed any Martians on the surface of Mars. To get in touch with the show, the contact number, the caller's rule, 1-800-848-9222. That's 1-800-848-9222. And thanks as we move through space, time and space, with our magical starship, Theater of the Mind Radio, our helmsmen, both Tony and Bill, making sure that you're heard and that we're heard here on 77 WABC. But first, David, let's go do a little sky update for everybody out there so they can actually step out and see some of the things that we talk about here. We begin, of course, on Monday, or Tuesday, I should say, October the 6th. The beautiful full harvest moon. This one occurs for the New York audience when we find the sun setting at 6:29 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. This moon, the beautiful harvest moon, rises at 6:08. And the reason it's called a harvest moon, it's the moon that's closest to the beginning of fall, which happened back on September the 22nd. Simple terms and simple English. The harvest moon was there when we were much more of an agricultural society, and obviously you could harvest crops by the light of the moon. So simply, the moon will be up before the sun sets. Check your times and locations all across the listening area. As we mentioned before, Comet 3I Atlas, the so-called Bracewell probe, that interplanetary comet, maybe not, or regular comet, probably, is very close to the planet Mars. Coming within 18 million miles, and spacecraft are going to get a very impressive view of it. Finally, if you're looking for planets, don't forget, in the early evening sky, in the southeast is the planet Saturn. And if you get into the early morning hours, let's say around 3 a.m., looking into the east and the northeast, more precisely, the planet Jupiter rules. Let's continue with David Barron, author of The Martians, the true story of an ancient alien craze that captured turn-of-the-century America. David, let's talk more about Percival Lowell and what he thought he saw, let's say even on the planet Venus. It wasn't just Mars that he observed diligently.
Right. Yes. So as we discussed last hour, Percival Lowell, the Bostonian who set up an observatory that still exists in Flagstaff, Arizona, was seeing all these lines on Mars that he believed were irrigation canals. Well, he turned his attention to Venus in the late 1890s, and he also reported seeing a network of lines there. Now, that was a great embarrassment because Venus is engulfed in clouds, a very thick atmosphere. You can't see the surface. And so when he reported seeing these lines, other astronomers were perplexed, and they ended up ridiculing him. That the best guess now is that actually what Lowell thought he saw on Venus was actually the blood vessels of his own eye projected onto his retina. You know how when you go to get your eyes examined and they shine a bright light from an angle, you can actually see that network of blood vessels.
You're right.
And that can happen in a telescope. So that was a huge embarrassment that actually sent Lowell into a deep depression, and he slunk away for a few years. But when he came back, he was still promoting the idea of the lines on Mars, and those were not so easily dismissed.
Well, yes, that's very interesting from the historical account that you have in your book here. I find it totally fascinating that this has been history that hasn't really been talked about in great detail until you come around to talk more about the man, the legend, and all the things that he did, because this observatory that I, say people, if you haven't seen it, come on up to Flagstaff, Arizona. If you make it a vacation, that's even better, because there's really a lot to see there, right, David? I mean, his telescope. And you have a little story that I want you to share with the audience. Upon his death, his wife and his family wanted to do something very special for him. Tell us about that. That's amazing.
Well, if you go to the Lowell Observatory, you can actually see his mausoleum. It's right next to the original observatory dome with the telescope he used to study Mars. And the mausoleum, it's this granite. It looks like a little observatory. And it's so his body is in there, and it's engraved with some passage from one of his books. I'm not going to get it exactly right, but basically it talks about how a brilliant astronomer who sees things that others who haven't seen risks being disbelieved, and that sort of sums it up for him. Because by the time he died in 1916, his idea that there was a civilization on Mars by then was pretty much ridiculed. But he hung on to the idea and saw himself as this persecuted genius who someday would be up there in the pantheon of science with Charles Darwin and others. In the end, he died, having made one of the big blunders in science. But actually, and I point this out in my book, even though Percival Lowell got a lot wrong in terms of the science, he was very influential in some very positive ways. And the obituaries when he died were glowing. They talked about this man who, yes, his science wasn't quite right. In the end, he was wrong about the civilization on Mars, but he inspired the public to imagine life in outer space and to get excited about the exploration of outer space. And Percival Lowell's Mars craze actually inspired the early rocket scientists. Robert H. Goddard, who was the man from Massachusetts who built the first liquid-fueled rocket, the father of American rocketry, he dedicated his life to building rockets because as a kid he read H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, which came out of that whole Mars craze, and thought, I wonder if we actually could go to Mars. So Percival Lowell's crazy idea about the Martian civilization actually laid the groundwork for the space age itself.
Well, David, it's so amazing that we're speaking on this very date here, as most people in the morning of October 4, 2025. That's incredible because Robert Goddard, that could be a whole interview in itself, right? Just talking about the great pioneers in rocketry. But isn't that incredible? I mean, we talk about the time period, 68 years. Look at how far we've gone. And some people say we haven't gone far enough. But I find it amazing that since that time, but you're saying it so well, David Barron, that the inspiration that people like Lowell provided for other disciplines, moving on to the stars, which is fascinating.
Well,
1-800.
I was just going to say, we've been talking about 3i Atlas. Is it a comet or is it a spaceship? I think it's probably a comet, but who knows? Maybe it is a spaceship. And until we, get a good look at it, we don't know. And so imagining what could be makes us want to find out what is actually true.
You're absolutely right, David Barron. You say it so well. 1-800-848-9222. If you have any opinions, commentary, as we like dialogue, and critical thinking is always a good way to go. But, ladies and gentlemen, this is where you get to participate in the Dr. Sky experience, listening to these great guests that we have who are authors, experts in their field. And what are we doing, David? We're opening up our minds to the great mysteries of the universe. David, I wanted you to go down this path. This is fascinating to me, and particularly to the New York market, the New York audience, the home of WABC. This is fascinating. Nikola Tesla. I've tried to read as much as I can about him and carry on the torch here of talking about him. His ability to maybe send radio signals to the planet Mars, this was something that wasn't just on a piece of paper. He actually set up some kind of big towers, not only in Colorado, but even on Long Island? Am I correct in that assumption?
Absolutely. So I mentioned last hour, for those who were listening at that time, how in 1899 Nikola Tesla went to Colorado to study the radio technology. He was a pioneer in radio, and he picked up a signal he thought came from Mars. Well, he had the idea of actually trying to communicate back to the Martians, as well as to set up a way to communicate across the globe itself. And he approached J.P. Morgan, and J.P. Morgan invested in this plan. And Tesla famously set up this enormous transmitting tower out on Long Island in what is now Shoreham, Long Island. Back then it was a place called Wardenclyffe. It was a little vacation settlement. And it was Tesla's idea that he was going to use this to communicate with Mars, but he was never able to get the money to complete it, and it was torn down for scrap in 1917. But actually, I think out on Long Island in Shoreham, there's now this Tesla museum, I believe it is, that's where that tower was.
I'm fascinated by this, David, because imagine if J.P. Morgan, of course, did continue to fund this particular research and this particular technology, we might have had things even faster than we do today. I mean, he was onto something. I mean, what a genius. But what a sad ending to his life, though, in my opinion. I mean, many people may not even know the rest of that story. Would you be kind enough to share what happened to Nikola Tesla?
He was a genius. So, Nikola Tesla was responsible for our modern system of electrical power generation and distribution. He famously was caught up in this war of the electrical currents with Thomas Edison, who believed that direct current was the way to go, and Tesla said it was alternating current, and Tesla was right. So in the 1890s, he was hailed as a genius. He was wealthy. He was a celebrity. But he really fell on hard times, and he became sort of he was seen as sort of a kook. He would say these sort of mystical, mysterious things, and was he brilliant or was he crazy? And it was kind of hard to figure out which was which. And by the time he died, I think it was in the 1940s, he pretty much was broke. And
what a shame.
But friends were able to support him, and he was most famous for feeding the pigeons in Bryant Park. His best friends were the pigeons. But early in life, he really was a genius who changed the world.
Well, can you imagine, David? This is jumping out of the body kind of thing. Imagine what he would have thought today of a vehicle driving down the street, electrically powered, named in his honor. I think, just give us a description. You're an author. You know the man better. What do you think he would have thought? He would have stepped back and thought this was like something from another world? Obviously it was his world. He was a genius.
Oh, he I don't think he would have been surprised. I think he would have been surprised that it took this long. One of the things he did, and I have this in my book, again, he was a pioneer in radio, which at the time wasn't actually for broadcasting sound, but for broadcasting signals of other sorts. So he developed in 1898 basically a remote-controlled boat that he displayed to the public that was just a marvel. The idea that he could be 20 feet away from this boat and he could steer it, it was like magic. And so this was an idea he had to actually create a full-sized torpedo boat for the U.S. Navy that could be controlled as a drone, so it wouldn't have any people and it would be controlled from shore. He had all these fantastical ideas that actually, have kind of come true today.
It's amazing. And you also describe in your book, now tell me if I have this correct, because I did read the book, ladies and gentlemen. That's interesting because the Cliff Notes I don't go by. I like to read this before we listen to the authors. But here we go. In your book, do I have it correctly that there was some sort of sighting of brilliant lights on the surface of Mars also? Am I correct in that assumption? Through the telescope.
Right, absolutely. So that figures in too. So Mars comes around close to Earth every 26 months. So when Mars comes close, the term is an astronomical opposition because Mars is opposite the sun in the sky. So when Mars comes close, just with the naked eye, it becomes very bright and obvious against the stars. But looking at it through a telescope, you get a really good view of it. Well, in 1892, when Mars came close to Earth, a lot of astronomers were looking at it, and they noticed at certain times on the very rim of Mars these three bright lights that would light up for a little while and then go away. And people were speculating that this was a signal from the Martians to Earth. Most astronomers said it was probably sunlight reflecting off high clouds, but that was all over the newspapers. And actually, whenever Mars came close, when it came close again in 1894, people saw lights like that on the rim of Mars. And getting back to H.G. Wells and his book, The War of the Worlds, if you were to read his original book, he says, the narrator of the book says, well, in 1894, astronomers noted these bright lights on the rim of Mars that in retrospect must have been the Martians casting their enormous guns that they would fire at us. And so that was true. There were reports in 1894 of these mysterious lights on Mars, and that's what H.G. Wells used his imagination then to take the story forward.
This is an amazing story with our guest, David Barron. The book, of course, ladies and gentlemen, if you're just joining us in hour number 2 in the Dr. Sky Experience, The Martians, the true story of an alien craze that captured turn-of-the-century America. David, not to digress too much, but my own visual observations of Mars through rather powerful telescopes, I've actually observed during the early morning on Mars this gigantic volcano, the largest volcano in the solar system, Nix Olympica, Mount Olympus. It's about 70,000 feet tall. I can actually see sometimes under high power, steady conditions, no boiling image, actually morning clouds over the top of that as it rotates into view Why am I telling you this, ladies and gentlemen? Because you too can get involved with moderate-sized telescopes, right, David, and actually enjoy upcoming oppositions of Mars. Don't miss it. It's fascinating stuff. It really is. Let's continue with the callers. David, you're very popular. I hope we can go to all the callers here. Looks like we have 750 on the line here. But let's say good morning to Ann in Staten Island. You're on with David Barron. How are you doing this morning?
Good morning. I love the show. It is so fascinating.
Thank you.
And I wanted to share with you that I did see Invasion from Mars when I was a little girl, and it was fantastic and frightening, and I've never forgotten it all through the years. It was really had quite an impact on me.
Oh yeah, it's amazing. And
I heard
I hid under my pillow
was amazing.
or something. Yeah, I hid under my pillow.
Yes, it was scary. It was very scary, and I saw it on Turner Classic Movies, and I actually. I wanted to see it. I used to talk about it with my husband. I said, you know that movie? I forgot the name of it, but it was the sand where the sand was, the sand scene. That was so scary. And,
with the music in the background, too, the eerie music. That's weird.
Yes,
no, you're bringing it up, Ann. It's amazing. It's amazing.
It was so fabulous, and I totally forgot about them. I didn't forget the movie, but I always wanted them to show it. And eventually, Turner Classic Movies showed it after years. And I would say to my husband, what is the name of that movie? Because I always remembered the sand scene.
Well, Ann, I'm going to try to get it in Blu-ray if I can. But, David, isn't this interesting? We're reminiscing about not only what people thought, as your book describes, about Martians themselves, but these other kind of strange things. Sci-fi took off. It's amazing, David, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, one of the movies I remember from that time was called Them, about these giant ants that came.
I got it on Blu-ray.
Yeah. Well, and interestingly, there were people who thought that the Martians might be ants. So that was kind of out there in the culture as well.
And thank you for being part of the show. I appreciate your commentary. And I say to people, go out and get a copy of Invaders from Mars, or look it on the streaming services. And thanks. You enlivened the conversation with your reminiscing about a scary movie when I was a kid, too. So thanks for being there. Let's continue on. We have a big board of callers. Wow, I can hardly say that right. Big board of callers. Melvin in Indiana, good morning. You're on with David Barron. How are you doing over there in Indiana?
I'm doing good. I enjoy listening to your program.
Thank you.
With Tesla, the reason he died as a pauper, however you pronounce it, he had a lot of backers. J.P. Morgan, a lot of people were backing his inventions and what he was doing. But when he announced he wants to provide electricity for free, and there would be no profit in it, that's when all his backers backed off.
Interesting.
And that's why he was a pauper.
Well, I think a lot of people want free stuff nowadays, and that's not going to get into the politics story, but the whole thing is, that's interesting. I didn't know that, Melvin. David, that's an interesting commentary.
That is a theory that a number of people have put forward. Indeed, Tesla did want to provide free electricity. His idea was he basically was going to build these towers like the one he built on Long Island all around the world, and they would transmit signals but also electricity through the air, so that you could be anywhere. You could be at the South Pole and you could tap into this electrical stream in the atmosphere to run a factory or whatever, wherever you were. You could have airplanes being run from electricity taken out of the air.
Incredible.
I mean, in the end, I don't think it would have worked as a plan, but that is what he wanted to do. J.P. Morgan, that may be one reason he backed out. Another thing is that Tesla just was not very practical money-wise, and Marconi kind of beat Tesla to it with radio. Now, Marconi, some say, cheated on the patents and violated patents that Tesla had, and that also was no good for Tesla. It's a complicated story, but you're absolutely right, Melvin, that Tesla did have a plan to provide free electricity to the world.
Well, Melvin, this is interesting. I don't think anybody doubted. Look at your own electric bills nowadays, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm not here to say electric cars are no good. I mean, it's not my right to say that. I mean, everybody has their opinion. But don't you think, Melvin, our whole grid is so stressed out? And unfortunately, if we go into another level of conversation, which we'll have guests on this particular subject, the dangers of electromagnetic pulse across our nation and around the world, where the whole system could be popped out from a suborbital, atomic detonation in the atmosphere, not to alarm people. But, Melvin, you bring up some good points. You get the last word if you did want to comment.
Well, what I'd like to also say is with Tesla, the United States government was very stupid, because when he was living in, I think it was the New Yorker Hotel in New York, when he died, the Soviet Union went through his records and took all his paperwork.
No, I didn't know that. Wow, that's amazing. Wow. Melvin, thanks for enlightening us. We're almost up at the hard break here at the bottom of the hour. Appreciate you and everybody. If you haven't gotten on the air yet, ladies and gentlemen, still, like Robert in Philadelphia, Joaquin in Pennsylvania, Bill in Huntington, and everybody else that wants to chime in, you know the secret way to get in. Not so secret now. 1-800-848-9222. David, that's fascinating, the story of Tesla, because I was looking at a book when I was driving back from the mountains today, and in this little antique store, I happened to see a book about the inventions of Tesla, and when I opened it, I didn't purchase it, and here's why, because it looked to be all in mathematic formula and not something that you could simply understand. So I imagine, who knows, maybe I'm giving you some incentive. Would David Barron be maybe writing a book on Nikola Tesla?
Well, there are a bunch of books that have been written. He was a fascinating man. I mean, he was ahead of his time. And I mentioned this in my book. I mean, his idea with these towers around the world was that people would have a small device in their pocket that they could use to communicate or get news wherever they are in the world.
Wow.
Basically,
sounds like a smartphone.
The smartphone, exactly.
Yeah, that's incredible.
So that was more than 100 years ago.
We'll be back, ladies and gentlemen, as we go to the hard break at the bottom of the hour. We appreciate you listening to the Dr. Sky Experience on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Email me at drsky@wabcradio.com. Questions, comments, or even suggestions of future guests as we go again to explore what? The many mysteries of the universe and what's around us. More with David Barron, the book, The Martians, when we come back.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
I would like to die on Mars, just not on impact. A quote from Elon Musk. 33 minutes after the hour, and a special thanks to legendary performer Wayne Newton. We talk with him also and often, and we appreciate his talents. We continue with David Barron, ladies and gentlemen. We continue also with the callers to this radio show. They've been patient in waiting. Let's say good morning to Robert in Philadelphia. Robert, good morning. How are you doing this early Saturday morning?
Hi, Dr. Sky. It's great to talk to you and your guest, Dr. Barron.
Yes.
I had an interesting fact. I wanted to talk about 3i Atlas, but the caller, Melvin, was correct in that he wanted to provide free power, but he was incorrect in what happened to his records. When Tesla died, I believe he was at the New Yorker Hotel. Okay. Everything that he had, all of his records were taken by the FBI, and they were sent to MIT. And the reason why I'm mentioning this, I don't know if your guest is aware of it, but the head of the MIT team that went through Tesla's files was an engineer named John G. Trump. Yes, that was Donald Trump's paternal uncle. It was his father's older brother. I just thought that was a very unique little, so, no, we got him, and I think we're using him. But the reason why I'm calling about the asteroid, I believe it is because I'm looking at the NASA. A lot of the NASA surveillance around Mars is down right now because of the government shutdown.
Correct.
And I do not believe for 1 minute that the Secretary of War called all of the senior officers in the world to Quantico just to tell them that they were out of shape. So I'm a little suspicious to begin with. But
maybe,
I'm listening. I'm sifting through what I'm saying, and I'm listening to guys like Dr. Avi Loeb and Kiko Mikado. I don't know if you guys are aware of them. But
very much so, yes. Very much so.
And they're saying that it's not acting like an asteroid. It's got that greenish color, which is indicative of a high nickel alloy. The tail at one point was aimed towards the sun, which would indicate some kind of propulsion system. It took a solar plasma ejection from the sun and kept on going. I mean, tell me if I'm saying things that aren't true here.
No, Robert. Hey, listen, I appreciate it, and I say respectfully, please let me jump in on this. And I actually want David to really take the lead on it. But here we go. Just a little bit from me. Studying this for so long, I'm trying to get Dr. Avi Loeb on this radio show, and he's obviously telling me, and I respect it, he's saying that he's not really for the late-night type of interview. So what do? We try to get him in a daytime pre-record. But nothing's better, right, than live radio, Robert, right? So the interaction that people can have. I've observed so many comments. I'm not dismissing what you're saying. Obviously, the first of the whole cycle of these objects, they're comets, not asteroids. But the first one was the Oumuamua object discovered by a good friend of mine named Dr. Robert Wyrick. He discovered something that was looking pancake-shaped, they thought. And it was receding from the solar system, going faster, because if a cometary object is moving away from the sun, it slows down in its speed. So Oumuamua got the first round of saying, well, maybe this is an interstellar probe. And then came Borisov, the comet, which truly was a comet. But, Robert, we're going to keep our eyes and ears open on this. We really don't know for sure, but my guess it is a comet. Let's hear David Barron's side of this, because he's our special guest.
Well, I appreciate your asking, but, Robert, you're following this more closely than I am, and Dr. Sky, you certainly are too. But I would say that, and Avi Loeb now, as was said, Oumuamua, when that other interstellar object came through, he also was speculating that it was a spacecraft. Who knows? Maybe it is. But, what I learned in writing my book about that period when everyone went Mars crazy more than 100 years ago, and a lot of people were convinced that there was a civilization on Mars, and there wasn't. It says a lot about us and what we project into outer space. That is, what we wish is out there. And many of us, and I would include myself, really want to find life out there. We don't want to be alone. And I think we have to be cautious about sometimes letting our desires get ahead of the evidence. But I have not been following it as closely as you have, and I can't say that it isn't a spacecraft. But we just have to be careful. We don't, we don't find something we really hope is there and convince ourselves that it's true when maybe it's not.
Well, Robert, you get the last word, but I just want to jump in with this and then have you get the last word. We're going to have a rare opportunity, as I mentioned at the opening of the first hour. The comet is, as I call it, the comet object, or 3I, obviously, this 2025. This is interesting. Many spacecraft are actually going to image that are already in orbit around Mars. So maybe there'll be more information, hopefully, right, in the next few days, Robert, to tell us if indeed this is a signature, spectrographically, image-wise, photography-wise, different than any comet we've seen. And then who knows? I want to be a believer that it's a Bracewell probe, but you get the last word, Robert. Thanks always for your commentary.
This is why we call into these great shows, so we can hear something real instead of wondering what we're looking at is real. I just thought that the odds, me and you just a couple weeks ago were talking about us entering the galactic plane, and that strange things might start happening as a result of this. It's just very odd that an interstellar object would be coming along at the solar plane, which is very, very weird to me. But here's my final thought. You know that I like to watch space aliens, and I always thought, our ancient aliens, and I always thought there was a lot of questions we have. Sure. And I thought that such news would bring nothing but anticipation. But I got to be honest with you. When I'm thinking about this, there's a little trepidation that's coming in there, too. And that's something I hadn't thought about when I was dreaming about one day making contact. You know what I mean?
I hear you very clearly. And it could be, hey, that big Hegseth meeting, they don't just call you to lose weight and, take away the love handles, right, and be in shape. Who knows? Let's put it on the other side of the equation. Maybe they all know something that's headed this way and a global type of thing. Who knows? But I don't know. I want to hope and pray that it's just a passing comet, interstellar as it is. But, Robert, you're always very informative, and I promised myself one day that I'd like to have the conversation with you when we talk aviation about your experiences with the F-15. That would be awesome. Thank you, Robert. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we continue our conversations here. David Barron, thank you for being part of this whole experience. It's really impressive, the research that you do on these particular subjects in history about the Martians and the true story of an alien craze that captured turn-of-the-century America. How do people get in touch with you? That's the most important question of the whole show.
Sure. Well, I mean, you can go to themartiansbook.com to find out more about my book, The Martians, which is available anywhere books are sold. It's also available as an ebook and an audio book. But it's only been out came out late August, so it's still a new book.
Well, we're going to have you to the top of the hour, but with your okay, I don't want to pull your arm too hard on this, but I'm a big fan of eclipses, and I wanted to see if I can get a little look-see on some of the other books that you've written, and the one that we'll talk about, if it's okay by you, when we come back from the break, American Eclipse. I utilized your book, never to plagiarize it, of course, in many programs to do presentations for the big August, big eclipse that happened in 2017, and I was astounded by what I read in there. So if you don't mind, give us a little synopsis. This is an amazing book about another story in history, about a great eclipse that happened quite a while ago. Talk about it, if you would.
Absolutely, I love talking about total eclipses. So I'm an eclipse chaser. I've now seen 9 total solar eclipses across the globe.
Wow, you beat me by 3.
Just to be clear, so of course a solar eclipse happens when the moon goes in front of the sun. Total solar eclipse is something really quite rare for any given point on Earth. A total solar eclipse is when the moon totally covers the surface of the sun, and that happens at any given point on Earth only about once every 400 years. So to see a total eclipse, you generally have to go to where it is. It's not going to come to you. Well, in 1878, there was a total solar eclipse that crossed America's Wild West. It went from Montana Territory down to Texas. And astronomers even back then knew how to predict total solar eclipses, and total eclipses were really important for astronomical science because even though a total eclipse usually lasts only 2 or 3 minutes, that's it. It's when the sun is hidden by the moon, you have an opportunity to see what's around the sun, particularly the sun's outer atmosphere, called the solar corona, which is the most glorious sight in the heavens. So back in 1878, dozens of the era's great scientists raced out to the Wild West for this event, including Thomas Edison, who was in Wyoming right before he invented the incandescent light. There was an all-female expedition from Vassar that went to Denver in 1878 to show what women could do in science. So my book, American Eclipse, which was first published in 2017 and was released last year, is the story of these scientists who went out there, their adventures, and what an important event it was for the rise of America as a scientific power. And I might note one more thing, and this is important to New Yorkers. It's actually been turned into a musical that's hopefully headed to Broadway.
Awesome. Awesome.
This is something I never expected would happen, but the brilliant composer-lyricist Michael John LaChiusa, who's got several Tony nominations, has written the show. I've seen it in workshop productions. Hopefully it will see its world premiere someplace, probably a regional theater, not in New York, hopefully late next year. And the hope is it'll get to Broadway in 2027.
Well, congratulations. That's amazing. I mean, and again, you and I could talk off air for hours or even talk on the air for 44 hours about the experience. So, folks, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't seen a total solar eclipse, I'm going to mention mine, and David, of course, beats me by 3. But there's some upcoming ones that I'd like to share with the audience, David, and your participation and commentary on when we come back from this last break of the second hour of the Dr. Sky Experience. And if we haven't gotten you yet, Joaquin in Pennsylvania, Bill in Huntington, stand by if you'd be so kind. Your patience is appreciated. And for everybody else, excuse me, 1-800-848-9222. That's 1-800-848-9222. We'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen, with much more as we talk about the Martians, eclipses, with our special guest, author, producer, man of extraordinary knowledge, David Barron. We'll be right back.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
That Dr. Sky says thank you to Sergei Khrushchev, the son of the former Soviet leader, We had many conversations with him about what we're celebrating right now, ladies and gentlemen, in addition to talking about the Martians with David Barron and his brand new book, but also as we celebrate the beginning of the space program, October the 4th, 1957. 46 minutes after the hour, let's continue with the callers. Patiently, they've been waiting. Let's say good morning to Joaquin in Pennsylvania. Joaquin, you're on with David Barron. How you doing today?
Good morning. Good morning, Dr. Scott. Good morning, David. You know, I have to say that one of my favorites when it comes to the science fiction was the Twilight Zone episode, To Serve Man.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that one? And
the best.
And funny that the main character, his name was George Norrie. And at the end, the lady, she comes out and she says, Mr. Norrie, don't get on that spaceship. We've deciphered the book. It's a cookbook.
That's a great episode. Yeah. Joaquin, you bring up something good.
I kind of, I kind of think that that's the way our encounters would be with beings from outer space. But a couple other interesting ones too. I don't know if you remember the old Superman series. Remember the little men that came out from the oil well from underneath?
I remember.
Heads?
Mm-hmm. That's it. And after this radio show here in Arizona, I watch on Saturday nights the reruns of the original Superman. You're right. You see the little guys in there, and I think there was one called the Mole Men or something, too, that were down there. Interesting. David? Yeah, David, this is interesting. Your comments on all this stuff. As we move out to explore other types of life, not necessarily like us or maybe like us, in your book, The Martians, way back when, gave us a good idea that Mars was inhabited. So said the New York Times, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, back at the turn of the last century, people really believed that Martians were real, and it's so much fun talking about all of this science fiction from the middle part of the 1900s, from when we were kids, because that all comes directly out of the period I write about. You've probably heard of the Hugo Awards.
Yes, I have.
Big literary awards in science fiction. They're named after a man named Hugo Gernsback, who's considered the father of American science fiction, the father of modern science fiction. Hugo Gernsback was a pioneering writer and more so editor of science fiction magazines in the early part of the 1900s. Hugo Gernsback, reminiscing about how he got into that business, said it was because when he was a kid, he read one of the books by Percival Lowell talking about life on Mars, and he just got so wrapped up in this idea of imagining life in outer space that he then decided that he was going to become someone who promoted this idea through fiction. And so the science fiction we're all talking about comes directly out of Hugo Gernsback having read Percival Lowell when he was a kid.
That's amazing. And I used one of Lowell's books, Mars, the Abode of Life, in one of our talks a few years ago. It's different writing. It was interesting. It's more of the classical type writing, as you probably know. But again, on the same theme, David, that there was intelligent life on the planet Mars, as we talk about this a long, long time ago. And now, who knows what we'll find when spacecraft and people go to the surface of Mars. Joaquin, you get the last word if you're still with us.
Yeah,
and please continue.
I actually want to bring one more up. I don't know if you remember an old series, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea.
Oh, I watch it all the time.
I think that was the precursor to Star Trek. And also, too, the one caller, as he commented, I think it was Donald Trump's Uncle John Trump actually had something to do with going through Nikola Tesla's
that's amazing.
His information.
That's
incredible. And I experienced one time a Tesla coil. Somebody I knew had a Tesla coil, and they used to sit, in this room basically, and it's supposed to somehow, be health beneficial. I sat in on that maybe like 2 times because he lives quite a distance away from me, but it was actually kind of interesting, the machine.
That's amazing. Always, Joaquin, appreciate your commentary here as we got a full board of callers here. And again, thanks for listening to the Dr. Sky Experience, but more important, being part of it. So thank you, Joaquin. Appreciate you. Have a good weekend. Let's say Bill in Huntington. Let's say good morning. And if he's there, he's been the patient caller, patient listener. Good morning. You're on with David Barron. How you doing?
Oh, okay. Now, about in the same time period you're talking about, America was interested in the stock market. And the stock trader, he always wants to predict the future price. And one of the ways they would do that is by astrology. And another is looking at cycles, like the sunspot cycle. But what really impressed them was the retrograde motion of Mars, because, when the bull tires out, the stock chart retraces. And yeah. And,
I'm not the great like Larry Kudlow. God bless him. He knows all about the whole concept of how stocks move and everything like that. Blessings to him. But it's interesting what you bring up here, a correlation, or maybe some sort of a correlation between things that go on in the financial world and other things, particularly the story of the retrograde of Mars. David, talk about the retrograde of Mars. It's easy for me to watch it, but I'd rather you explain it so people can understand what Bill in Huntington is actually talking about.
Right. Yeah. So Mars goes through the sky, crosses the sky as we pass by it in our orbit. But as it gets close to us, it actually seems to reverse its direction and loop around and then continue on its way. And that's called its retrograde motion. And that's around the time when Mars is closest to us. And in astrology, I know that there's believed to have a lot of significance. I should say Percival Lowell was very good at picking stocks.
I didn't know that.
I don't know that he used his Mars observations in doing that, but he was a very wealthy man. He came from money, and he was very good at investing his money. So maybe he was getting something I don't know about from his observations of Mars when it came to picking stocks.
It's amazing. Bill, thanks for being part of the show. We got to move forward, but I always appreciate your commentary and everyone else, ladies and gentlemen. But what I wanted to end the show off with, you're okay, talking a little bit more about the American Eclipse book, which we recommend people get. You can actually get both of these books, ladies and gentlemen, deep and rich in history on their selective subjects. But I wanted to make notice of two total eclipses. I don't know if I can meet you there. Maybe that'll be the way to do this. But August 12th, 2026, people can look this up. The big totality path will sweep across various areas. Greenland, I don't think I'm going to go there, but parts of southern Spain will be in totality, right near the Rock of Gibraltar. That'll be fascinating, not only for the culture, for the food, and the most amazing time. I don't know if August is the best time to go to Spain, but also this one, David, I wanted you to give commentary on August 2, 2027, one of the longest eclipses of this material, of this century, will happen right near Luxor in Egypt, right near this whole amazing, archaeology of Egypt. That one over 6 minutes and change. These are two amazing things that people should see. Maybe you've already booked the reservations. I don't know, but this is interesting.
I do. Well, actually, next year I will be in Greenland.
Wow.
For that eclipse on a cruise ship in one of the fjords of Greenland, and I do intend to be in Luxor in Egypt in 2027. So, again, a total eclipse is something everyone should see at least once in a lifetime. The one in 2027, if you're going to choose one to see, my goodness, that's the one to see, because, as you said, it lasts over 6 minutes, which is a really long time for a total eclipse. And it's going to cross North Africa, where the Sahara, where you're pretty much guaranteed of clear skies unless there's going to be a dust storm or something. So
bring a lot of sunscreen. Right, there you go.
Exactly. So not the easiest place to get to, and it's the tours there are going to be quite expensive. But there are other places along the path you might go. And then I might say, on July 22nd of 2028, there's a total eclipse that will cross Australia. That one actually will last over 5 minutes in certain areas, and of course Australia has a very dry climate, so that would be a good place to go as well.
Well, David, we're going to give this out there as one last, kind of alert to let people know that they should try to book these. And I'm not in the travel agency business by any means. But again, you've outranked me by a few of these. But ladies and gentlemen, really seriously, bottom line, in many people's estimations, right, David, the most beautiful sight in nature, something that comes around very infrequently. But here we go. The longest one, the reason we're telling you to get excited about the ones in 2026 and 2027, the longest total solar eclipse in thousands of years, mark the date, July 16, 2186, when this will be a 7 minute and 29 second totality, almost reaching the record, right, of 7 minutes and 32 seconds. So isn't that a good reason to get set now? Because I don't know where I'm going to be in 2186. How about you, David?
Yeah, right. Well, actually, the next total eclipse that will cross over where I live in Boulder, Colorado, won't be until the year 2775.
Wow.
I'm definitely not going to be around then. But there is one, now put this on your calendar, August 12th, 2045.
Ah, yes.
So that one will cross the United States, and that one will last over 6 minutes.
Wow.
In fact, that one will cross Colorado, not Boulder where I live, but it will go south of here. It will go over Pikes Peak. And if I'm still alive on August 12th, 2045,
Blessings.
I intend to be on top of Pikes Peak, Colorado for that total eclipse.
As you describe in your book, that, of course, a great story in American Eclipse about somebody who actually did that because of the rarefied atmosphere and the lack of oxygen. That's a story for another time with David Barron, right? A great story. But that's interesting. So that one in 2045, I don't have to drive too far here in Arizona to see it. But that's an amazing story. And we go back to all these different eclipses. The excitement, David, you and I both know that, and anybody who's seen one is just off the charts. We were down in Texas. Blessings to those that lost their lives in Texas Hill Country right there in a little tiny town called Junction. And we had intermittent clouds, but the whole spirit of all the great people in Texas and Texas Hill Country then, the entire population just came alive, so excited about this great mystery in the universe, what I call sacred geometry. I'm sure you would agree, right?
Totally. Absolutely. Again, really, I mean, I'm a science guy. I went to see a total eclipse because I'm interested in astronomy, and it was, I dare say, a spiritual experience. It just
there you
completely, right? The first one I saw, it was like seeing God. It was to see the solar corona blossom in this dark sky. It just connects you with the universe like nothing else, and that's why I traveled in 2 years ago. I went to the far northwest corner of Australia, in the middle of nowhere, for a total eclipse that lasted 56 seconds. And it was worth it to go all out.
So you're a true eclipsophile, as they say. That's amazing.
I am.
David Barron, thank you for being with us. The clock rules, as you know, and I do appreciate all the callers to the Dr. Sky Experience. Again, ladies and gentlemen, mark it in your calendars, put it into your phones, wherever you listen, and however you listen, I should say. The Dr. Sky Experience here, midnight, as we move from Friday into Saturday mornings, Eastern Daylight Time to 2 a.m., and then, ladies and gentlemen, on Saturday midnight to 2 a.m., Eastern Daylight Time into Sunday. David Barron, we appreciate you. How do they get in touch with you again, if there's a way that they can do it easy? What's the best method?
Well, if they go to themartiansbook.com, you'll find out about my book, and you can click around. There's a contact page. You can send an email to me. And I really appreciate all the callers and their wonderful comments.
David, you're a great guest, and I hope we can do this again with your okay. If you can say we can do it again, I'm a happy man. I appreciate your time.
I would love that.
Have a good morning. Now we pass the torch of knowledge and dialogue on to T.J. McCormick. Ladies and gentlemen, get set all the way into early parts of the dawn here on the other side of midnight. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, to Tony and Bill navigating the signal and the radio station and this particular show, the Dr. Sky Experience. All the best to each and every one of you. Clear skies, health, and happiness. We'll do it again soon, and email me at drsky@wabcradio.com.
Thanks for listening to the Dr. Sky Experience. You can hear the Dr. Sky Experience Saturday mornings, midnight to 2 a.m. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?